Do these weird widgets make horsepower? We are gonna find out, blown and unblown, on a pretty wicked small block Ford, this time on Engine Masters. Here's what we know. Increasing airflow through an internal combustion engine improves power, even when you increase that airflow in minute ways. You know this from the legendary Engine Masters salad bowl. We've put this on top of carburetors in a number of tests, and it has never failed to make power. Sometimes it's just 2, sometimes it's 5 to 7, but the whole point is that we're making that carburetor more efficient by giving it a dish to direct the airflow. That's basically what this episode is about, but with EFI, we're gonna find out if these doohickeys right here can make added power. These things would be called a number of things. They could be a Bellmouth, they could be a volute, they could be a radiused entry. Some might call them a velocity stack, although that's a little bit old school. The thing about them is you can either put them on the front of an EFI throttle body, or you can stab them on the inlet side of a turbo or a centrifugal supercharger. So those are the things that we're going to test, both NA and blown, with and without the volutes. Other things that you're gonna get in this episode are gonna be 2 different power combos for a small block Ford, plus you're gonna see the comparison of blown versus unblown. It's gonna be pretty meaty. All right, let's talk about the engine that we're gonna be testing today. This is a 363 cubic inch small block Ford from Dart. It's based on the architecture of a 302 or 5-liter pushrod Ford. It's an aftermarket block from Dart from their SHP line, and that's what allows it to have a bigger bore than you would normally get from any production 302. It's a 4 1/8 inch bore, and the stroke is 3.4 inches for 363 1/2 cubic inches. The compression ratio on this is 10 to 1. The cylinder heads are also from Dart. They're their Ford head with a 225cc CNC ported inlet runner. The camshaft in this thing is a custom comp cam solid roller. The duration at 50,000 tappet lift is 244 on the intake, 258 on the exhaust. That's a really big split. It's on a lobe separation angle of 113 degrees, which means that this thing will RPM. It'll go to 7,100 RPM naturally aspirated, and the lift is 600 both on the intake and the exhaust. Now, we've run this thing with a carburetor almost always, but now we've got the Holley High Ram on this thing for the very first time. Here's the thing about the intercooler. We are going to run it in the naturally aspirated setup. Now, we don't really know if that's gonna help or hurt power. Maybe the fins in the intercooler are an air restriction, or who knows? Maybe they're actually straightening out the air and making more power. We don't know. But we're gonna run it that way anyway because it's still gonna be a solid A/B test. Now, another thing that could be limiting the naturally aspirated horsepower on this thing is that we're running a fairly small throttle body. That is a Holley 90mm unit. Probably a 105 would be better, but the fact of the matter is, we had a Bellmouth that was going to fit on this perfectly. So that's what we're running. All right, that's the deal. Later on in the episode, I'm gonna tell you all about the supercharger, but right now, I'm gonna have a pretty interesting discussion about dyno stuff with the Steves, and after that, we will fire up the 363 in naturally aspirated trim and find out if the official doohickey of airflow is really worth power. It's freezing in here.
You came from Minnesota, you came from Florida. I came from Harupa Valley, which is more exciting.
It's cold, which brings up something that we normally don't talk about on the show, which is correction factor.
There's SAE and STP.
So what is the STP, standard temperature and pressure?
2992 barrel, 60 degrees, 0 humidity.
So the dyno test results are corrected for atmosphere, basically. for a barometric pressure of 29.92. And what did you say the temperature was? 60?
60 degrees.
Right. And so what happens is when the weather is really good for making horsepower today, you don't get much of a correction factor. If it's really hot, and if there's, not a lot of air pressure, then you get more of a correction factor. Why do they do that? It's so that you can compare engine horsepower, say, in Denver versus Death Valley, and the two different conditions can be compared equally as far as horsepower goes.
Yeah.
Is that right? And FYI, another thing that we try and do on the show is make sure that we're doing our tests on the same day, in the same weather conditions, so even with the correction factor, it's apples and apples.
Just trying to reduce variables. When we're sometimes looking at twosies, threesies, it becomes important to make sure it's a level playing field.
Ready to fire it up? See our baseline with no doohickey?
With no salad bowl facing forward?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure, let's go.
Okay, here we go with the volute, the Bellmouth, the doohickey, the reverse salad bowl. All right, will it make 500 horsepower now? No. Let's see the baseline. Going right to it.
It's still fun because sometimes the things that don't even surprise me are still fun.
Here's our baseline horsepower from the 363. We made 416.6 pound-feet of torque at 5,200 RPM and 490.6 horsepower at 6,700 RPM.
Not much to say.
No, that's it. Dulcich was looking how it flattens out at the top of the curve. Do you have a valve spring concern there?
Nope.
Nope.
That's not a valve spring thing. That's just a motor thing and airflow.
It's just a motor thing. Now, we're gonna have a look at the Bellmouth power. And it's a little bit better. The red lines here are gonna be with the Bellmouth on the throttle body, and now we've got 420.2 pound-feet of torque. Interestingly, it dropped down to 4,900 RPM. Up top, we've still got a 6,700 RPM peak, but now it's making 497.2. You can see that the power gain with the Bellmouth starts to separate right here at 4,800 RPM, and it grows bigger and bigger as the airflow demand increases with more RPM.
Like I say, sometimes just the most simple things count. And you start adding up a lot of little details, and all of a sudden you've made a whole bunch more power.
Yeah, it made a difference. I mean, 7 horsepower.
And that was the easiest changeover we've ever done.
Completely.
Yeah, that was a whole hose clamp, Steve. What are you talking about?
Let's talk about why. This thing has a 90mm throttle body on it. I think that might be a restriction for 500 horsepower, somewhere in that neighborhood. So perhaps the Bellmouth helps it enough to give it a bigger gain than we might see on another engine.
There's also turbulent problems too when you've got a sharp edge in air trying to move past it. Steve and I were discussing that earlier, and for the same reasons you port a cylinder head and make entries and radius and things smoother, the air travels better.
Well, it's the sharp-edged entry, you have the venturi constricti effect. And basically, that means that the air is coming in and it's coming from all around, but it has to navigate that sharp edge, so the effective diameter is reduced of the throttle body. Whereas with the radius, it has a surface to follow going in, so you're taking advantage of the full diameter.
Makes perfect sense to me. I mean, it's got a 90mm throttle body on it with the volute, and maybe it's a 78 or 80 without, actually, by the time the air has packed around it and reduced the size of the entry.
And more turbulent because it's going over that edge and stuff's going around like this. So, yeah, the Bellmouth is just good. And honestly, this is the fuel injection version of the salad bowl that we've seen on the carburetor so many times, but it picked up more power. 7 is pretty good. Salad bowl, I think we've seen 2 to 5. Yeah. Now I'm gonna go tell you about the supercharger we're gonna use, and I suspect that the Bellmouth is gonna make a way bigger difference with boost. And now we move on to one of the greatest loves of my engine master's life, and that is the centrifugal supercharger. This is essentially like a belt-driven turbocharger. You can see that it's got an impeller right here. Air gets sucked in there and crammed out here and into the engine. This particular one is a ProCharger model F1A94. If you look at their catalogs, they consider this the top of the line for their street superchargers. This thing has a drive ratio in this case of 1.61 to 1. Now, there's also a gear reduction inside the supercharger of 5.4 to 1. Do all the math and assume that we're going to run this thing to 6,500 RPM, and the supercharger is running at 56,500 RPM. Now that sounds pretty cool until you realize that the limit of the F1A94 is actually 74,000 RPM. That means we're not really running this supercharger in the sweet spot. And the truth of the matter is that could affect the outcome of our test. It's not really taxed at the absolute limit. Now, speaking of maximums, like that 74,000 RPM, if you look at the ProCharger catalog, they recommend this thing up to 1,300 horsepower. The truth is, every time I've run a ProCharger, they usually make a lot more power than what they rate them at. And you can usually run them at just a speck more RPM than they say, although don't tell anybody I said that because they're not going to agree to it. The other maximum on these is 36 PSI, and we know that we're going to be running this closer to 17 PSI. So once again, not at all at the limit of what this thing can do. One important thing about the ProCharger design is that it has an internal oil supply, and that means that you do not need to run like a pressure line from your engine into the supercharger or a drain back to the oil pan, and I just find that super convenient. That's one of the reasons I love this thing. You just completely bolt them on the engine, done. I definitely want to run one with an intercooler though, and in this case, we're going to be using the TIC Performance sandwich intercooler that goes in that Holley high ram intake manifold. The last thing that you should know is we're going to be running this with an 8-rib drive belt. Now, ProCharger has gone through and upgraded a lot of their drive systems, and they swear to me that you can run an 8-rib belt up to way north of 1,000 horsepower. Of course, what we're going to be doing is testing the ProCharger Bellmouth on the inlet side of this supercharger. It's going to end up going right there. But of course, we're going to run it first without the Bellmouth and then with. And I hope we see a big power gain. All right, let's roll into the dyno, and Troy's gonna hang this thing on the front of the driver's side cylinder head. Easy as that. We'll throw a belt on it, and then we will start making boost.
Oh, you got that on there pretty quick.
Yeah. One might think that we've done this before, once or twice. Boom, that easy.
We have our ProCharger centrifugal blower installed. Now we're going to run it for the numbers and see what it does.
How come it makes like twice as much power?
Oh, because it has twice as much pressure.
That's right.
Twice as much air.
Let's look at it. Ooh, nice.
Wow, it is.
This is typical of what we see with a ProCharger that has a just dead rising boost curve. Peak torque and peak horsepower are at the same RPM, which is 6,500, which is where you stopped the pull.
It actually would probably be peak torque at 6,500, and this thing would just keep heading north and for another 500 or so with power, but 363 inches, 1,000 horsepower, that's a pile.
Pretty crazy. Well, that's actually 948 horsepower. Yeah. Here are our final power numbers, both at 6,500 RPM. We made 766.6 pound-feet of torque and 948.7 horsepower. So let's have a look at the boost curve. A peak of 17.3 PSI, which makes sense. It's actually not fully efficient. I think we would double the horsepower at 14.7 PSI, 15 PSI.
Theoretically.
Yeah, theoretically. Obviously, there's losses.
You're never going to get there, but...
There are some parasitic losses even with the best blowers and...
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the tune-up, which is really conservative to keep this thing from scattering.
The air-fuel ratio is more in the middle tens, just trying to be conservative, do some thermal management. We could make more power if it were a touch over 11 or even 11 and a half. The timing's only at 26 degrees. I think we could push it to 29, maybe even 30 and make more power. But you know, it takes a lot of time pulling spark plugs and doing all of those things to make sure it's safe and okay at those numbers. Instead of just arbitrarily going there and having a problem, I'm not willing to do that. So we're just being a little conservative because horsepower isn't specifically what we're testing as far as related to the tune-up.
A/B comparison on airflow.
Exactly.
And so basically you're running the thing much richer than you really need to, and you're not running as much timing advance as you could, but you're keeping our engine in one piece.
You always say it so much more clear than I do.
Well, after you train me. Right, now we're gonna go install the Bellmouth and see if it makes more power. Go.
As you can see here on the Pro Charger, we just have an open air inlet, and I'm gonna add the radius entry. It's just a hose clamp away. One of the things I always like to do is make sure it's good and tight. And the only thing left to do is fire it up and see if it helps horsepower.
Here's our power with the Bellmouth on there. Again, both the power peaks are at 6,500 RPM. We got 974 horsepower, and the torque, 787. None of that means anything till we compare it with the non-Bellmouth pull. Oh, look at that. All right, the red lines here are with no radius entry or volute or Bellmouth. I've called it everything throughout the episode. And the black lines are with.
Yeah.
So you can see that it begins to diverge down here right at 5250. And then on the way up, as the RPM increase, the airflow increases, they begin to separate.
And the demand.
What is the difference there? 949 to 974.
Yeah.
That's 25 horsepower.
I got to admit, I'm disappointed. I thought it was a way bigger difference than that based on past experience.
You know, all the times that we've messed around with these centrifugal superchargers, we've learned to control a lot of the boost and power numbers on the inlet side, but we've normally done it by restricting the inlet.
Yeah.
This time we're trying to help the inlet, and so this is not honestly a huge surprise to me. It just shows me that all the little things can add up.
Slowly add up.
And if you're trying to make the most out of it, let's say an undersized blower, because that's what you have, probably help more in that kind of scenario.
Yeah, this thing you can make more power than that with the tiniest change in pulley ratio.
I mean, we've got it turned down.
The thing we do know for a fact, though, from past testing is that an air filter, as you were saying, on the inlet side is a restriction and will really harpoon your horsepower and your boost.
When we were trying to test leaks in one episode, we actually didn't want to make 1,000 horsepower, so we started by restricting the inlet side with just a smaller air filter and dragging it down. And it knocked, what, 150 or 200 horsepower out of the thing. So it's the right way to control power if you want to go down. Obviously, if you want to go up, that's the right size blower and the right pulleys, and you can do about whatever you want.
I think the lesson that we learned is that inlet restriction on one of these blowers is way worse than what you gain from putting the Bellmouth on there. But speaking to the guys at Pro Charger, they're like, the more power you make, the bigger difference this makes.
Well, and I think that kind of just stands to reason. If there's no demand, then it's not going to make a whole bunch of difference. But at 1,500 horsepower or 18 or 2,000 or whatever, that becomes a real critical area.
Because like you said, it's a diverging curve, so.
Let's have a look at the difference in boost between these two. I'm thinking it's nothing like what I expected it to be. I'm just all about being wrong in this episode. Okay, black line is with the Bellmouth, red is without, and you can see we got about half a pound extra boost up at peak.
Yeah.
I thought it would be 1 or 2.
Yeah, like I say, it doesn't surprise me. We have a little difference there just on kind of what our expectations were, but that's what makes it fun.
So, final conclusion, I don't think I want to say that the Bellmouth always works, but I think the higher your power level and the worse your sharp edge on your inlet, the more likely it is to work.
I think what I'm taking away from this is really more that small details do count.
Right.
And attention to detail in every aspect of your engine. If you just kind of give it that little bit of love rub, you have a lot more potential for something being right, not breaking, and making more power.
And I want to go back to blower sizing too, because if you have a smaller blower that's giving all it's got, then that could help more.
Become more critical.
Yeah.
The same way I said that the 90mm throttle body maybe showed more of an advantage than if we had a 105 on it.
Probably.
Yeah. Little tricks to make more airflow. More airflow can make more boost, and all in all, it makes more power, which is our goal on every episode of Engine Masters. Okay, here we go with the volute, the Bellmouth, the doohickey, the reverse salad bowl, the incompetence. I thought this was going to install. What am I doing?
Just waiting for him?
I've been ready. All right, here we go.
Yeah.
Did you hear action? Use that one time at a time.
The quickest supercharger installation ever.
What are the pros and cons and power of sequential versus batch fire fuel injection? You will know by the time you're done watching this episode of Engine Masters. I wanted to know, so I figured you would too. Is there a horsepower benefit of sequential electronic fuel injection versus batch fire? I mean, sequential just seems so much more sciencey. The thing is, when we actually got into it with some guys who are EFI experts, including people inside Holley EFI and even Fast, all of a sudden there was confusion over what batch fire even meant. Honestly, sequential is easier to understand and explain, so that's what I'm gonna do first. Of course, we're talking about engines with multi-point electronic fuel injection. What does that mean? It means that there is an injector in the intake runner right above the port in the cylinder head, and there's one in every cylinder. Of course, in an 8-cylinder, you typically have 8. You can also do multiples of 8. You can run 2 per runner and everything else. We've got 1 injector per cylinder. With sequential EFI, the computer tells each injector to fire or to send fuel into the engine every 90 degrees of crankshaft rotation, and it does it in the order of the firing order. For example, on the LS engine, 1872653. I know, ignore this right here. It's not what it is. It's a little bit different for the LS engine. So that's what it's doing. It's like precision pinpointing the fuel into each cylinder as it needs it. Or is it? Well, that's what we're gonna find out. But then there's batch fire, and this is the thing where we got different answers from different people. Basically, the way I derived all the info I got is that batch fire means you're firing more than 1 injector at the same time. You could be doing pairs, you could be doing 4 at once, you could be doing all 8 at the same time. Sometimes, batch fire really comes into play with throttle body fuel injection, where the injectors are in the throttle body up on top of the engine, not multi-point. But there is batch fire with multi-point as well. As a matter of fact, what we usually do, what you've seen actually every time we've done EFI on Engine Masters, is what's called bank to bank, and that's what we're gonna do here. Bank to bank means a whole batch of 4 injectors on one side of the engine fires, and then the other batch fires. Specifically, each bank fires every 180 degrees. So you get one bank, 180 degrees of crankshaft rotation later, the next bank. You come up on another 180 degrees, the first one fires, then the second one. So it goes back and forth. So once again, the difference, sequential in firing order every 90 degrees. Batch fire, or what we're gonna do is bank to bank, is one bank every 180 degrees. Got it? Well, it really seems like there should be a difference. Batch fire seems super sloppy. Sequential seems super clean and sophisticated. We're gonna find out if it's true. And we're gonna do it on an LS engine, but the thing is, this is actually relevant for you if you've got an older muscle car engine and you wanna run EFI. All you need to do if you wanna do sequential injection on your muscle car engine, or on any engine really, is first of all, have a control box that can handle it. What we're running here is the Holley HP EFI box. It's a pretty basic box that can still handle sequential. Once you've got that, you also need to have a camshaft position sensor. On an LS engine or any modern engine, that's gonna be built in. You're already gonna have it. On an older muscle car engine, you can get a distributor, sometimes called a dual sync, that has a sensor built in. So that's how you would make this happen with like an older muscle car engine, or an older dyno operator like Steve Brule. See what I did there? I'm actually gonna ask the Steves about their sort of perception of sequential versus batch fire. But first, let's talk about the engine we're gonna do this with. We had to borrow this thing because we wanted big power from an LS7. Yeah, it's the General Motors LS7 architecture as built by American Heritage Performance. This thing is 442 cubic inches. Here's the basic rundown. It's a stock LS2 block, but it's got Darton sleeves for a big bore. That means 4.130 inches, 4 1/8 for the crank. It ends up to 442 cubic inches. It has 14-to-1 compression with a scat crank rods, Racetech pistons. It has a Comp Cams custom hydraulic roller camshaft. It's 245 duration on the intake, 266 on the exhaust, 660 lift, 115-degree lobe separation angle. The cylinder heads are a custom CNC ported unit called the Archangel from American Heritage Performance. And up top, we've got the Performance Design Carbon PTR intake manifold. This thing should make north of 700 horsepower. All right, now let me quiz the Steves and we'll get to making some noise. Before we even get going, I need to poll you guys. Dulcich.
I'm ready to go.
Yeah. What is your opinion sort of in the marketplace on the pros and cons or the differences, not technically, but philosophically, about batch versus sequential?
In the mind of Dulcich,
Yeah.
the sequential is more sophisticated and the batch is more primitive. So I've always kind of favored the capability of doing sequential. I don't know what the power advantage is, but I perceive that there would be.
Short version, batch is ham-fisted, sequential has the Dulcich precision. Now,
Yes.
I actually agree with you. That's sort of my perception too, but I don't think he thinks the same.
No.
I think you guys are crawling up the wrong tree.
Okay, why?
Well, because basically it comes down to time. I mean, you've got a valve that's open and closed. You've got an injector that fires. The injector could be firing at 80% duty cycle. The valve is open at 40% of the cycle. It's firing at the back of a closed valve, whether it's sequential
Or batch.
Or batch if it's at a lot of engine speed. I think a lot of the sequential stuff came from OEMs when they're looking for fuel economy and efficiency at cruise speeds. I think so much is going on so fast in race engine stuff or performance stuff, I don't think it matters. I think there's just a bunch of gas in there and it's all heading one direction.
You had an analogy for that once. What was it? When all the fuel is just sitting there on the table, waiting for a cylinder to gobble it up?
Right.
And you're saying it doesn't matter.
Well, I don't think it does. Not
In the performance world or in the whole world?
In the performance world, I don't think that sequential is nearly as critical as one might be for other reasons, like I say, mileage, those sorts of things. I think batch works just fine for horsepower and wide open throttle.
Like low fuel demand situations, it has more time to follow the valve
More
action.
precision, as you said.
Yes, it is a time thing.
Here's where I'm gonna have to just go ahead and disagree with you there. For a boosted application, guys absolutely are using sequential. But I think they're doing that because they see one plug that gets nipped and they put more fuel on that hole.
Of course. I mean, when you see an outlying cylinder that's 15 to 1, you'd like to fix it. We do the same thing with nitrous motors. That's no magic, no secret. We're not doing it necessarily for power. If you've got something that's way outlying and a cylinder that's bad, it needs to be fixed. But I think In multi-port fuel injection, you're not going to see tons of big outliers like we would in carbureted applications.
Especially on an application like this with a manifold that's pretty kind of okay. All right, so this is what we're here to actually sort out. We're going to just look at bank-to-bank versus sequential. Our first run on this engine is going to be bank-to-bank.
Yay.
Yay. Run it.
Baseline us.
Not that pretty of a curve, actually.
No, it's not. I mean, there's a couple things that are going on here. I mean, I think that particular intake manifold is kind of interesting in the fact that if you open the throttle body, there's about this much more runner hanging up into the plenum. So it's a much longer runner than we think.
Well, yeah, it looks like it's that long.
Yeah,
but it's that long.
Kind of, exactly. Yeah. And I think there's some resonance things going on there with potentially that runner hanging out into the plenum this far. It's hard to say, but we tried, and there's no tuning that bump out of it or dip.
When I say it's not pretty, it's like, we really like it when we fire something up and rip it and it's just got the perfect whoosh. And this one sort of got some whoop-de-doos and bumps along the way. So it just means something's going on between the cam and the intake manifold and the resonance and stuff, and it's fine, right?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, are those dips or are we just getting power bulges coming up here and there?
You're onto something.
Go.
Some guys would look at this and love a double torque peak about 900 or 1,000 RPM apart.
So I'm going, this is bad, and you're going, this is good.
Yeah.
That explains our
half empty or
personalities
half
right now.
full?
Perfect. Well, here's the half full that we're looking at. This thing made 617 pound-feet of torque at 5,300 RPM, and up at 7,100 RPM, we saw 717 horsepower. And that's really all there is until we start changing stuff up.
Go have more fun.
Next, just flip the switch, right? We're gonna go to sequential.
It's almost that simple in the Holley software.
Don't tune it up, though. I want to see, like, the difference, just straight batch to batch versus sequential without changing the fuel table.
I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I just want to know what's different.
What it'll do.
It should be nothing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So Ishmael's going to go ahead and do our initial switch over just from batch fire to sequential, and then we're going to get even a little tougher and deeper into it after that.
So Brule and Ish have got it set now on sequential, but we've done no tuning. It's the same fuel map. We're gonna see what happens. Well, we ran that sequential and it ended up being rich. We went in the room, messed with it a lot, tuned it up a lot, and here's the final answer. We made it through that nightmare, man. We put a lot of laps on this guy's engine. American Heritage Performance, thank you. Here are power numbers by the time we had tuned up the sequential fuel injection. We made 623 pound-feet of torque at 5,300 RPM, and this time it ran all the way up to 7,400 RPM, where it made 718.3 horsepower. So we did a lot of testing, figured out what was going on, and this curve here shows something that we don't normally show, which right here is how much fuel we are using in pounds per hour. This is literally a vein in our fuel hose that's telling how much fuel the engine is consuming. So it's not ratio, it's literal volume of fuel.
Yes, absolutely.
And you'll see when you add that to the graph, it sort of makes the dyno curve or the horsepower and torque curves look smoother as well, just because of the way it scales. Now I'm going to show you what happened when they flipped the switch and turned on the sequential fuel injection. Have you seen this yet?
No.
It's hideous.
Really?
Yeah. What went wrong here? Okay. This was completely unexpected. To be clear, the black lines here are when we had our bank-to-bank injection. The red lines are just turning on sequential without changing the fuel table. So Why is it flowing so much more fuel and making so much less power?
I just like being right that batch fire works so well.
Well, I guess so. You were right about that. I'll wait till the end of the episode before I'm going to give you that one. But when we were eating lunch and I was telling Dulcich, man, I was doing the Dulcich, or the brulee head rub. I was like, I don't understand why we threw the switch and it's so much richer. And he just like comes right up with the answer.
You know, I really do have to give it to him because Steve, not being a guy who works with fuel injection every day,
Ever.
just kind of intuitively said, you know, some other things have to be going on. I think there's some time.
Well, you would think it'd be exactly the same, but when you're firing it bank to bank as your strategy, each injector is firing twice as often as you are sequential. So that's open, close, and you have more dead time. So it's not going to flow as much fuel.
I know your logic flow went straight to like valve lift. It's actually area under the curve of fuel flow through the injector this time. What you're saying is that if it opens and closes and opens and closes, it's actually flowing less fuel than if you opened it once and closed it in the same time.
The duty cycle might be the same. And the other thing is, you know, when you close the door, that fuel stops and then has to accelerate again.
Right.
One more time.
So he was a genius for pulling that out.
I really have to give it to him.
was.
We're talking milliseconds and it just turns into this whole thing. And that was a really astute observation.
So to be clear on all of this conversation, the matter of fact is when you switch it from bank to bank to sequential, the sequential is going to get richer because it can flow more fuel because the injector is open longer because it just opens and closes once instead of opening and closing twice. Why would it open and close twice with the bank to bank? Well, because each bank fires twice for 720 degrees of rotation.
Which is a cycle.
Which is a cycle, and so it flows half as much fuel but does it twice. Bottom line is that it does make it way richer. And so after a lot of head rubbing, we went in there and figured it out and tuned it to death with Ish's help, and here's what we got. Boom. Now, the blue line here is our trouble one that was super rich and it was a disaster. And you can barely see the difference between the red line and the black line. One of them is bank to bank and one of them is sequential. And as you can see, it's the same thing. The bottom line is firing at sequential
more precisely
as we thought doesn't necessarily add up to more performance. However, there's other things you can do as far as individual cylinder tuning. But let's have a look at our air-fuel ratio chart here. These are like the most confusing thing we ever show you on Engine Masters, except for sometimes when I get tongue-tied. This is going to be a graph of air-fuel ratio over RPM. Down here is RPM. Over here is 12 to 1, which is really rich. Up here is 14.5 to 1, which is really lean. Each of these segments represents 8 cylinders of the engine. For example, the black lines here are the bank-to-bank. Red lines are sequential. And there's so many black lines and so many red lines because it's all 8 cylinders. And what it allows us to do is, at a glance, kind of see which is packed more tightly and therefore having a smoother air-fuel ratio curve over RPM. And they're both tighter than what we typically see.
Certainly tighter than what we see with carburetors on top, but I got to give it to the sequential. It actually is a little bit tighter grouping.
And that tells us the distribution's better.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. We've got a couple big outliers here. And with batch, or bank to bank, there's nothing we can do about that.
No, nothing.
But with sequential, we can. See, I wanted to do individual cylinder tuning in this entire episode, but the fact is this is all grouped so tightly. I mean, look at this. You're not going to improve that. Because to your point earlier, like I was complaining about, let's just take this and group it more tightly. And you were like, at some point, it's still spraying gas at the back of the valve and the junk is splashing back.
Yeah.
And part of it is someone very wise once said, measurable but significant.
Right. Yeah, there's measurable and there's significant. It's not significant.
You know, and maybe we could measure an air-fuel difference by 2 or 3 tenths and we can go fix it, but did it do anything or change anything? Probably not.
Right. All right, so the next thing he's gonna do is go in there with Ish and just try and show you how they can tighten up the air-fuel ratio on those couple of cylinders that were real outliers.
Okay, one more try.
Yep.
Well, as you guys can see, we've got a couple of cylinders here, one being lean, one being rich. So Isha's actually going to go in and he's going to richen up number 6 cylinder right in this area, and he's going to lean up number 2 cylinder right in this area and try and flatten those out. Probably not going to make any difference in power, but if you were a forced induction guy, it might help if you had a lean cylinder that you could pick away at just to make sure you didn't damage anything.
Well, it took those guys just a few whacks at it, but you can see the results here. When we started with these black lines, these 2 cylinders were way up at 14.25 to 1 and 12 to 1. So way lean, way rich. They tightened it up right there. The result in power? 0. Yeah, absolutely nothing, and that's what we've seen before, which is why we haven't really gone through and tightened up every single cylinder. As much as I wanted to do individual cylinder tuning, you convinced me that in this application, it's just not worth it.
You know, sometimes you got to have something really bad to make it really good. And this was already pretty darn good. So there wasn't a lot of area to move to, but I think it was a great demonstration on what can be done.
Yeah.
And to your point, a blower guy with that 14.25 with 18 pounds of boost, he needs to be able to richen up that cylinder.
Or 35 pounds of boost. I mean, come on.
He doesn't want to richen every cylinder because then the power starts to go away.
Yep.
So it's very specific, and the sequential, I've got to hand it to it, is just more tunable.
So I think final conclusion, first of all, you were vindicated. Batch is good enough for an application like this. And you know what, 700 horsepower sort of, 442-inch motor is not a pooch. It's not super high-end race, but it's certainly, better than a typical cruiser.
How many guys have a 700 horsepower motor?
Not that many NA guys are cruising around with that.
Everybody I meet says they have a 700 horsepower motor.
Yeah,
What are you
that's
talking
true.
about?
But yeah, batch fire ends up just working fine for that. Sequential, I'm gonna still argue, is more precision and absolutely necessary for the higher the boost you go, the more nitrous you get, the more important that's gonna become just to save the engine.
I learned a lot today.
The big thing I learned, actually, was that bank-to-bank injection fires 1 bank every 180 degrees. And when it adds all up, it's the same amount of fuel flow technically as if you fire each individual cylinder in the firing order, except for the difference in the dead time in the injector. That, for me, is like the biggest walk away from this.
It's just informative. And, guys who do fuel injection every day, all day long, that's like, well, what? You didn't know that?
That's duh.
But, I mean, this was good stuff for me.
But take that back. We called some of these experts, and what did they say? The only thing I know is, no, what was the quote?
The only thing that's always the same is nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
That's it. We were trying to get definitions. What does batch fire mean? What does bank-to-bank mean?
Well, it depends on whether you're talking throttle bodies originally, or you're talking semi-sequential or semi-batch fire, or if you're talking, 2 cylinders every 180 or 4 cylinders every 360. I mean, it got and everybody had a different opinion of what was correct.
And if you think about it, gathering all of those opinions and narrowing it down to something digestible and factual is what we attempt to do every single time on Engine Masters. I guess our first step is going to be a baseline with batch fire injection, which is kind of how we always do it. Go.
Do it. Go.
Go.
Leave. The fuel injector on the back of the valve? It's like when you're at the urinal and you're not peeing on the B, and all of a sudden you're wearing sandals and your feet are getting wet, and you're like, no, I gotta aim differently. That's what the injector's doing at the back of the valve. I'm gonna test 3 identical camshafts, at least as far as you know. I'm gonna explain the latest camshaft technology for valve train reliability. Plus, you're gonna see our 800 horsepower, 7,500 RPM big block. Look at this, I've got the whiteboard and everything. That's because this is going to get more technical than probably anything that you've seen on Engine Masters, but it's super cool and you're gonna understand more about camshafts than you did before. Here's our plan. We're gonna test 3 different cams that will appear to you to be identical if you're looking at your cam card or even the catalog. Here's the specs of all 3 cams that we're gonna test, and then I'll show you what's different about them. The duration at 50 thousandths tap at lift, which is something you'll learn more about in this episode, is 284 degrees on the intake and 292 on the exhaust. The lobe separation angle that we're not really gonna address is all the same, 112 degrees. The lift, also identical, 0.775 inches on the intake and 0.748 on the exhaust. So what can be different about these camshafts when the specs that I always give you on the show are the same? Well, it all has to do with what's called camshaft intensity, which has to do with the rate of lift per degree of crankshaft rotation. So let me show you the 3 cams that we're going to be running. First of all, we've got the baseline, which is a 90s style design, a fairly slow rate on that thing. High intensity, mid 2000s. That one has got a much steeper ramp. Then we've got the low shock, which is similar to the high intensity except for how the valve opens and closes, which is designed almost purely for longevity. There's one more thing that is different about these camshafts. The baseline has a lash setting of 26 thousandths and 28 thousandths. The high intensity and low shock has a tighter lash. It's 16 thousandths and 20 thousandths. As we get into the rest of this, I'll explain how that's going to affect our test and how all of this works. You can see that as the lobe rotates, it's got to have a ramp in it that moves this lifter upwards. The whole episode is going to be about how that ramp affects what happens at the valve. Let's look at the baseline rate of lift, and I'm going to express all of this in terms of a bicycle going across a ramp to a jump. This is just a wheel on that lifter, just like the front wheel of your bicycle. So let's say that you're riding along right here. You're Mr. Stick Figure and you're riding your bike. If you're on a ramp on the baseline cam, you've got the ramp going roughly like this. But you've got that big 26 to 28 thousandths lash. So now imagine that the front of the ramp is cut off. So as the bicycle wheel is rolling over that ramp, first of all, it's got to hammer that little curb before it starts rising. And you can see how doing that would beat up parts in the valve train. Now the high intensity, this has a greater rate of lift. So your ramp is gonna end up at a steeper angle than it is on the baseline, and because it has less lash, it's gonna have a much smaller little curb right there. And then when we go to the low shock, and this is the real interesting part about reliability in the episode, your ramp is gonna have a little curve in it before it starts to climb. This part of the ramp is going to be essentially the same on the high intensity and the low shock, but it's that little curve right there that is gonna help this wheel maintain some longevity in addition to all the other valve train parts and especially the valve spring. Now let's look at a more technical view about how that is happening on the camshaft. I'm gonna take this graph right here and draw the trace of the lifter following the lobe. I'm gonna radically exaggerate everything so that you can sort of get the picture. On this graph right here, I've got lift in inches over here, and at the bottom, I've got crankshaft angle. So we're gonna be looking at rate of lift versus where the crankshaft is turned inside the engine, meaning where the piston position is. Now, remember that I told you that the duration at 50 thousandths tappet lift is the same on all of these. So let's just call this that point at 50 thousandths tappet lift. Remember, this right here is rise of the tappet. Now, we're also going to achieve the same total lift because every cam has the same lift. Now I'm going to go draw the baseline cam in green. Now I've got my high artwork here on the baseline cam. Let's look at the high intensity, which is going to have more lift per degree of crankshaft rotation. So it's going to start at about the same place. It's going to go through 50 thousandths tappet lift at the same place, but then it's gonna have way more meat on these 2 other sides. like so. Now, once again, I'm radically over-exaggerating this, but you can see that the 50 thousandths number is identical, but over here it's gonna get fatter. But now let's look at the low shock unit. I'm gonna do that in blue. Now, really the difference between the low shock is reliability. And so what it's gonna have is it's gonna open a little bit earlier, but it's gonna move really slowly, like so, up to that 50 thousandths number. After that, it is following the high intensity lobe. Ignore my art there. So the blue is actually going to be identical to the black. All we're seeing is that there's a much smoother ramp right there. And you can see that on my drawing of the bicycle. And that is the key to the episode here. Two things. There is the potential for more horsepower in many applications if you can open that valve faster. The reason is you can see that you've got the valve at a greater lift for longer. So there's a potential for more airflow. The other thing on the low shock is that that curve right there has proven itself to have greater reliability on the valve train. We, on Engine Masters, often judge camshafts not only based on this number right here, which is going to be at 50 thousandths tappet lift on both ends, but we also judge it at other points. We often look at what we call a 200 number, which would be 200 thousandths tappet lift. And remember, my scale might not be right here, but you get the idea. So the thing about checking the duration at 200 is look at this. This camshaft is over here at 200, whereas the old school 90s camshaft is right there at 200 thousandths lift. But let's draw a line straight down here to our crank angle number. And remember, this is these valves being open. And so therefore, the duration of this camshaft right here at 200 thousandths lift is way smaller than this camshaft, the high intensity is, at the same tappet lift. So the duration changes, and we know that duration can affect airflow into an engine, and in some cases it can affect the RPM range of the engine, or the RPM at which it makes peak power. One way or another, this often makes a difference. So that's how the different rate of lift can affect duration at different points on the camshaft. And honestly, you can check your duration at any point you want. 400 is a common one, but pick your point and you can actually get there. The thing is, it's not just the duration that changes. If you look at crankshaft angle, or where the piston is, the lift changes between the baseline and the higher intensity camshaft, in this case, the low shock. Look at this. When the piston is at top dead center, the baseline cam has a lift of 223 thousandths, but the low shock is 264, a bigger number. 14 degrees after top dead center, it's 323 versus 369. 70 degrees after top dead center, big change, 666 versus 684. So you can see that the more modern camshafts have more lift at different points in the cycle, and what that means is it's also a greater rate of lift per degree of crankshaft rotation, which is kind of the point of this whole thing, with the exception of the huge deal in modern times. The cam that was developed like between 2018 and 2022 is the low shock, and it's all about reliability on the whole valve train. Comp Cams has tested this in Top Fuel and Pro Stock and Super Stock and mud boggers and tractor pullers and even on NASCAR stuff, and we know that the low shock with that ramp, like the bicycle jump, is gonna be easier on valve train parts, and that means replacing less stuff. This right here is the key to the reliability. It's gonna have that ramp instead of the curb. All right, now we're gonna roll into the dyno cell, and I'm gonna tell you all about the engine that we're gonna be running. I've given you all of the rocket science about the 3 camshafts that we're going to test here. The question is, will they make a difference on this combination? Here's what it is. It's a big block Chevrolet at 478 cubic inches. That's sort of an unusual displacement. Here's how I got there. We used a Dart Big M aftermarket block, so it has a bore of 4.5 inches. That's bigger than anything you could get in a production big block Chevy. The crankshaft, however, is short. It's 3.76 inches, which is like a factory 396 or 427. So it's only 478 cubic inches, which means I had to get some custom pistons made by JE Pistons to get the compression I wanted, which is 12.25 to 1. Kind of high. The cylinder heads that we're using are from Dart Machinery, and they are CNC ported. They have an inlet runner of 365 cc's. It's from their Pro 1 line. These things are stout. We've run them before, and we really like them. The intake manifold's an Edelbrock Super Victor, which is a big single plane for big power, and it's been ported by Wilson Manifolds. You can see that Wilson also put fuel rails and some fuel injectors in this thing for EFI, but we're not running that right now. Instead, it's gonna be all carburetor, and that carburetor is a Holley XP Dominator at 1150 CFM. So, is this gonna give us the results we want? Well, you don't know until you fire it up in the polygraph room, run it on the dyno. All right, guys, we have a lot to do. I say shut up and go fire it up, because this is gonna be a long day with 2 camshaft changes.
This is one of those episodes I hate and love all at the same time.
It's gonna be good info.
Good info and a lot of work. That's the downside. So
Yeah.
I guess there's just one place to go.
Yep, show them the
Get started.
baseline, yeah. Okay. Pretty good. 815.8 horsepower at 7,300 RPM. And the torque at 6,400 RPM is 608.7. I did some maths. Horsepower-wise, 1.7 horsepower per cubic inch.
That's good.
That's really decent. I mean, there has been a couple times when we've made a little more power.
Yeah.
But that was with a vacuum pump, with the little bigger cam. It had some other advantages that this doesn't have. I'm very pleased with where this is at.
Yeah, me too. I'm gonna do torque. 1.27 torque per cubic inch.
That's very good for a 112 LSA cam.
Yeah, that's the thing, is it's giving some up. And for the displacement, it's a huge head and a huge intake manifold. Well, we're about to put in, technically, more camshaft with the same duration at 50. You ready for a big time consuming, burning hot oil changeover?
Yes.
No, but we'll do it anyway.
Okay, let's go. Second camshaft coming in. With the high-intensity camshaft, we saw 808 horsepower and 608 pound-feet of torque, which doesn't mean much until we overlay it, but it looks like the numbers are down a little.
Let's take a look.
Not a big difference up here. I mean, 815 to 808 sounds like something, but that's just a little something going on up there at 7,400 RPM.
Yeah, we're talking, 6 or 7 horsepower as far as a total difference.
What this is red cam is the baseline and the black line is the high intensity cam. Obviously, our cylinder head is not having any restriction that's causing it to just jump up 15 horsepower with the high intensity, clearly. And I think the little bump up at the top is who knows what. Down here, The increase in torque with the baseline cam, probably because the bigger lash makes it seem smaller.
That's certainly possible. This camshaft, the high intensity were never designed for down there.
No.
They were designed as drag race cams up in here. So
Yeah.
not a surprise.
I'm bummed. I mean, I thought it was going to make more horsepower, but
So did I, until you really dig into the combination and realize it probably wasn't starving for camshaft to begin with.
yeah,
Or area under the curve.
probably it would make more power if we had an inlet restriction like a bad manifold or a restrictor plate or a bad cylinder head.
We have
'Cause
enough of all of those.
We do.
Yeah.
But isn't it true that if you're running like a stock eliminator with a stock cylinder head, you add duration so
Yeah.
that the bad flow has longer to get air in there?
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily make a higher peak number per se, but what it does is it'll drag it out further.
Yeah.
You know, it's just combinations are combinations. They're all very interesting, and that's why you develop things. You work on the same combination over and over. I mean, I've had 500-inch stuff where we ran a half a dozen camshafts looking for 10 horsepower. So,
Yep. But our conclusion on this is the reason that we're not seeing more horsepower is it's a lot of cylinder head, 365cc head on a 478 cubic inch engine. Actually, now that we mention it, it's probably why the torque's a little bit soft too.
I think so. Yeah, that's certainly a possibility. I mean, up in that range, you know, part of it is these smaller motors, it's hard to get compression. And that's where a whole bunch of the torque comes from. So you put a big old camshaft with not a lot of compression, it's not going to be a big torque monster, but it'll still make good power.
Yeah. Ready to go with low shock? It only took us 2 hours to change the first cam. We're practiced now.
Yeah, we're warmed up.
Next cam swap incoming. Our low shock camshaft, just a speck down on horsepower up top versus the high intensity, 806.2, and the torque up a spec at 610.2. I'm calling that a wash.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're looking at 2 horsepower, repeatability, change of weather throughout the day, we could tune for days and
I'm hoping that we just see an overlay. Can we pull up the high intensity versus this? It's got the same lobe above the lash ramp.
Right.
By the way, lash ramp is the point on the camshaft lobe that transitions from the base circle into the ramp that lifts up. And yes, I expected to see the exact same curve, and it is in here, but down here it's not. The red lines are the high intensity, and the black lines are the low shock. And it's interesting, the low shock is a little speck worse up to 5,200 RPM, and then it's better for a bump. Actually, it's better all the way up into here.
Yeah.
Then it's the same, and then it's just a speck worse up top, which is kind of unusual. Let's start with the low end. How come it did this? We know that the low shock opens a little earlier to start that smooth ramp before it starts to ramp in. Looking at the data, I saw that by the time we were at 6 thousandths valve lift, it was actually a speck bigger camshaft than the high intensity, but you know, just by half a degree or something.
Honestly, it's really, really close, but with the high intensity, you're snapping the valve open just a little harder, and that would give you a little bit of an
it may make
airflow
the
advantage
intake
right
port
there.
just a little more active initially.
Yeah.
Once again, this engine probably has low intake airspeed through the ports. How would that affect this? Maybe the snap helps it a little bit more. Maybe the low lift flow coming in earlier helps the exhaust get the intake running.
Well, generally, if you
These
snap,
are wild guesses, by the way.
snapping it open is kind of an advantage as far as airflow and power, but realistically, the low shock cam is really not designed to operate or make power in that RPM range. It's
Not
a
at
drag
this
racing
size.
style cam or
Right.
a professional racing level cam.
My opinion is we're swapping twosies, threesies, you know, a little here, a little there. It's too different at the top. I mean, I'm going to call that basically the same. What I see in the advantage of the low shock is durability and longevity.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And potential for parts to last, valve spring life, and potential engine speed, honestly.
I would pick reliability over this and that.
Any day.
100%.
Yes, any day.
I think that's the main thing. Overall in the episode, I'm honestly bummed that we didn't see a power gain with the high intensity. I know you expected that too. I think we've explained that based on the fact that the cylinder head is really big for the application, so there's not a restriction that demands more airflow.
And again, back to that development thing, I hate to keep kind of beating on that, but the bottom line is there's no one camshaft fix for everything in every combination, no one cylinder head that makes everything better, no one intake. I mean, it's a combination. That's why we work on this stuff and try to make it better.
You know, sometimes we sit here and we go, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. In this case, I don't think we really did either one. We just found out that sometimes minute changes to a camshaft make minute changes in the power.
Right.
And that's it. But you know what? You gotta try it to find out. And that's what we do every single time on Engine Masters. Let's start with the low end. How come it did this? Steve?
I don't know.
That's why I didn't answer first. I was hoping it would be passed to someone else because I don't know.
Wow. It's also like, you know, a torture puzzle. It's like going into an escape room of Valve Train.
Well,
You gotta figure out the secret handshake. Can any one spark plug make more horsepower than another? You gotta know! And you'll find out this time on Engine Masters. Spark plug power. It's the episode that applies to everyone. Well, unless you're a diesel guy, in which case I guess you can be forgiven, or if you're an EV guy, in which case you're not watching the show. But spark plugs, this is the source of glorious internal combustion. Speaking of that, the spark plug goes all the way back to the mid-1850s. I would say there's probably no automotive part outside the spark plug that has had more different designs, all in the hunt of horsepower. And that's what we're gonna do here, is look for horsepower. Now, for full disclosure, I gotta tell you, there is a lot about spark plugs we are not gonna be able to test. There's some legitimacy to the fact that some plugs are designed for longevity, like they have a harder electrode. We can't test that here. We can't test reliability as far as like maybe opening up the resistor inside and braking. We can't do that. We can't test like misfire at really lean part throttle cruise. We can't test economy. There's a lot of stuff we can't do. So we will only be looking at power. And I have to be completely honest, I'm guessing that none of these different brands of spark plugs are actually going to make extra horsepower more than any of the other ones. So we're just gonna lay that on the table right now. But we are gonna look at a whole bunch of different types to sort of demonstrate that to you. And we'll have a lot of discussion based on our experience, industry knowledge, and some tips and tricks along the way. Let's look at the spark plugs that we're gonna test. First up is going to be the very basic Autolite spark plug. These are the ones that we buy all the time at the local corner parts store. There's nothing special about them. They're just a good basic spark plug. Moving on to what's in my hand is the NGK Racing plug. This is the only non-resistor spark plug that we'll be testing. You see, a lot of plugs that started coming out in the late 60s had a resistor in them, which helped cut down on electrical noise so you wouldn't hear that buzzing in your radio. Of course, the resistors are used today so that you don't have frequencies that are getting in trouble with like your EFI and things like that. That NGK Racing plug, once again, the only non-resistor. This is our personal favorite spark plug for running in a performance application. Once we get to running these, we'll give you a lot of tech tips about that spark plug. Next up, you're gonna have the NGK Iridium plugs. There are a ton of brands of spark plugs these days with a center electrode and maybe even a little pad on the ground strap that are made of iridium, platinum, all sorts of different materials. Typically, it's for longevity. longevity, we're gonna find out if they make a difference on our engine. Now, when we get into sort of our unusual plug, we're gonna run this Bosch, atypical of the normal Bosch spark plug, and made in Russia of all places. That's the one that we say is like this. It has 2 ground straps on it. That doesn't mean it has 2 sparks per sparking event, but a lot of people over the years have put multiple ground straps on plugs, and there's a lot of theories about how those can work. We're gonna see if that works in our application. Now, here's the disappointment. We really wanted to run the E3 spark plug. This is probably the most popular specialty plug today, but if you look at it closely, you can see our issue. I bought these spark plugs and we discovered that they are so long that they hit the pistons in our engine. So unfortunately, we're not going to be testing that one in our engine. However, we're gonna run all the rest of these and we're gonna get through it pretty quickly. I think the meat of the episode is going to be in a lot of tips and tricks, and we did find something that makes power. And it's not new, but it was a shock. Yeah, I said that. Let me walk into the dyno room and I'm gonna tell you all about the big block that we're testing and how we're gonna configure the ignition system to give the spark plugs the best chance of making power. Here's the engine we're gonna use. I wanted something with a little bit of cylinder pressure to give the spark plug some opportunity to show a difference. So this thing has 12 1/4 to 1 compression. That's not off the plot in any way, but it's the highest compression engine that we had sitting around here. This is a 478 cubic inch big block Chevy, and this thing should make 800 horsepower, and it should run to 7,500 RPM. So I think it's gonna be what we need, but I asked Steve to change the distributor, and that's because once again, I wanted to give the spark plugs the best opportunity to make a difference, meaning I wasn't gonna use the MSD Digital 7 Plus that we normally run for ignition, because that thing just has like the spark of death. So what we're gonna install is an MSD HEI, which is an aftermarket clone of the GM distributor that came out in 1974. It has an integral ignition module, so it doesn't use an external box. It also has an integral coil in the cap. So what Steve did is he took the old distributor and lined it up, pointing at the #1 cylinder, which is how we like to arrange our spark plug wires. Right now, the engine is at 35 degrees before top dead center, but it's not dropping into the oil pump drive, so he's gonna tick it and make it drop all the way in on the helical gear. All right, guys, every time I learn the lesson, I break my own rule. In my stand-up, I actually went on record and said I don't think any of this is gonna make a bit of difference.
You made a prediction?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, Freiburger.
Oh, now, I'll be wrong. Here's the thing. We want to see some kind of change, and so now I guaranteed it so that I can be wrong, because that's a trend.
I disagree. You're always right.
No, I'm not. Steve is. You think this is going to make a difference on all the spark plugs?
Oh, yeah.
I think the big deal here is going to be on you to make sure that our oil temp, water temp, everything is the same on each pull. Because if we see any warbles in there, it could be temperature related.
We're talking onesies, twosies, they have to be really
1 or 2 horsepower.
careful.
And I think it's important to note that onesies or twosies are zeros. You know, engine repeatability, dyno cell repeatability, there's something called cyclical variance. An engine does not do exactly the same thing every time you run it. So we're gonna see onesies and twosies. I expect to see that, but for all intent and purposes, in my mind, that's nothing.
Okay, so a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy here. I mean, we've all got a chip on our shoulder about this, except for apparently Dulcich, who thinks it's gonna make a
Well, I
difference.
just want to take the contrarian viewpoint. I mean, I don't think it's going to do anything anyway.
Yeah. So I'm gonna run in the cell and show you what we're gonna do for our very first spark plug. What's gonna happen is we're gonna show you a plug, run the engine. Show you a plug, run an engine, and at the end, we'll go back and look at all the results. All right, I'm gonna go throw in auto lights.
Perfect.
Our first spark plug is gonna be the Autolite 3924. Absolutely nothing special about this. Parts store standard. I've run them a million times. The gap right out of the box was 45 thousandths, and that's where we left them. The next thing we're gonna do is take our exact same Autolite 3924 plugs and we're gonna start messing around with the gap. These things are at 45 thousandths right now. That is the airspace in between the ground strap and the center electrode. The interesting thing about spark plugs is that they're designed with the ground strap sort of to match the gap that they expect you're gonna run for the application that the plug is designed for. You can see that the ground strap and the center electrode are pretty much parallel with each other. Now, when we start to change the gap, that's gonna change too. We're gonna stretch these out to 65 thousandths of an inch, which means we're gonna bend this up, which means it's not gonna be parallel anymore, but that's what you get. All right, we'll dyno it, and then we'll come back and run them tight.
What we're in the process of doing right now is removing all the spark plugs. We're gonna go ahead and change the gap from 65 thousandths, where we had it, down to 20 thousandths. MSD actually doesn't recommend going anything less than 20 thousandths because it can cause some arcing in the caps and some other problems. So we're gonna go ahead and follow their recommendations and take it to the minimum that we can that they recommend.
Now we're gonna go to the NGK Racing plug. This is my personal favorite for any kind of muscle car V8 performance application. And honestly, why wouldn't you run these on a 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder, whatever, if it's, yeah.
They're pretty good on everything.
I love this plug. Let me talk about why. There's a couple of reasons. First of all, you can get them in a bunch of heat ranges and they're very easy to understand. This one here says 7 on it, that one says 11. In NGK parlance, the bigger the number, the colder the plug. The cold and hot refers to the temperature of the center electrode. It's the center electrode, isn't it?
It's actually, my take on it is the length of the porcelain. The porcelain is like a fuse. And the shorter it is, the quicker it gets to the spark plug body and then to the head, which pulls heat away.
And you can see exactly that in these two plugs. This one right here has a longer porcelain. That is the hotter plug because the path to the coolant is much longer. You can tell this one is the number 11 plug because it's much colder. See how the porcelain's much closer and attaches kind of at the top? That is the difference. The last thing we really love about the NGK Racing plug is that see how silver it is and it's got some sort of coating on it? This is the spark plug that I personally can read the timing on the easiest. You'll be able to see after we run the thing, maybe I can show you again, that the coating on that strap will be burned. And if it's closer to that end of the strap, that means that it's too retarded. If you move it out towards the threads, that means it's more advanced. And you tend to want it just rolling over the other side of the bend right there. All right, Steve's putting in the 7s right now. First of all, here's the NGK Racing plug that we just removed, and I wanted to show you that tip that I talked about earlier about how you can look at the burn mark on the ground strap and determine if your ignition timing is right. You can see that it's burned right there. It's just on the upside of the turn on the strap. I would say that means that it wants a degree or even degree and a half or so of more ignition timing advance. We're not gonna do that because we're trying to run an A/B test here, but I thought I'd show it to you. Here's the next thing that's going to happen right there, the NGK iridium, the material that comes from meteors. You can see on this that it's got a really, really pointy center electrode. Basically, you use these if you want a lot of longevity because the iridium is really hard, but we're just throwing them in at about a 30 thousandths gap to see what happens. One more tip, if you're using spark plugs in aluminum head, it's a good idea to put a little anti-seize on them. We're not doing that, but it's a good idea. Out with the NGK Iridium, in with the Bosch, the first of our unconventional plugs. This has 2 ground straps on it. I don't know what the theory is here because, in our opinion, the laws of physics say that electricity jumps to the path of least resistance. So you're not getting 2 sparks here. Our belief is that there's just 1. The part number on these things, FLR8LDCU plus 7404-9.
We had the NGK plugs installed at the factory gap of 30 thousandths. Now I'm going to open it up to 65 thousandths and see if that makes any difference.
That ended up being a lot more interesting than I thought, but not for the reasons that I thought.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I
agree.
I think we should get to that in a minute, but let's call up each spark plug in the order that we tested them and see what's what. And the first up, the regular old Autolite, 807.7 horsepower, 609.3 pound-feet of torque. When we opened up the gap to 65 thou on the Autolite, 809.7 horsepower, 611.2 torque. Now we closed up the gap on the Autolite to 20 thousandths, which delivered 807.9 horsepower and 608 pound-feet of torque. I think the thing I learned about the Autolite is you can just grab them off the shelf and they run pretty good.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, they are my go-to for a cheap, inexpensive spark plug that's going to do the job for a regular application. I slam them in everything all the time.
No, I see them a lot in racing engines as well as the NGKs. There are builders that prefer the Autolite. So,
well, this is the standard lowest level Autolite, but that shows you don't need a super trick plug right out of the box to make power. The next one that we tested was the NGK. The racing plug has a little bit less horsepower than I wanted, 804.4, but the torque, pretty good, 610.1. And look at that, the black lines here are the Autolite and the red is the NGK. And interestingly, you can see that it's taking a nosedive up there, which really bothered me. But you'll see a test later that shows how we addressed that. And you know what, that NGK racing plug, I will continue to use in performance applications, probably into eternity.
well, it's got some benefits as far as the color of the CAD plating on the plug.
That's huge for me.
Silver. Actually, as it's dissipating heat, it's going to discolor the CAD plating. And so about 3 threads down seems to be a proper heat range for most applications that you're attempting. So what does it? Blackens it. Yes, it blackens the silver CAD plating.
On the dyno, just running, say, 2 or 3 pulls, you're not getting enough heat in it to read that.
Not going to see it, so it's going to take a few laps to get there, but it's a good guide.
Now we've got the Super Tricadero Iridium plugs, the NGK Iridium, and it made 802.7 horsepower. The torque, 610.7. Once again, dead overlay. This is nothing. I think there's so many Iridiums on the market because they last forever.
And we grew up in an era where you change spark plugs at 12,000 miles along with your points and cap and whatever.
After every cruise night, because I was huffing raw fuel out the exhaust.
Well, and that doesn't happen anymore with air fuel management being what it is. Spark plug, a standard spark plug interval is 70,000 miles on a late model vehicle.
Really?
Yeah, and the Iridiums last there. You pull them out and they look like they're untouched.
Well, a lot of that also is by regulation because those engines have to be able to maintain their emissions for X number of miles as an OEM requirement.
One other thing that I have heard about the Iridium and manufacturers making a claim that because it's a smaller diameter wire, it's easier to create a flame kernel under higher pressure applications, so they sell them for boosted applications typically, or they applaud them for that.
When I was at Jacobs Electronics, an aftermarket ignition manufacturer, we would tell people that if you choose to have like a weak ignition system, old point, stock coil or everything, that it's easier for that to jump the gap because the point is so pointy.
Yes, it's easier to create a flame kernel.
The spark jumps from the center electrode to the ground strap unless you hook up the coil backwards with points, and then it jumps from the ground strap to the center electrode.
A tip I didn't know.
Really?
There you go.
Wow.
All right, next one. We tested the Bosch
Yes.
What happens when you put 2 ground straps on the same plug? You make 803.1 horsepower and 610.6 pound-feet of torque. And the Bosch is now red. And once again, dead overlay, you can't even see that we pulled up another one. I think we all agree that it's not throwing 2 sparks per cycle. It's the path of least resistance is where the spark is going. I think it might change, alternate, go back and forth. And I think the plug lasts longer because you've got twice as much material to eat.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, good point.
Actually, the reason plugs often don't last is because there's actual metal transfer between the center electrode and the ground strap every time the spark throws. And eventually, you probably pulled plugs out and you can see the buildup on there. So final conversation about all these plugs that we tested. There's a lot that we didn't run. I mean, obviously there's AC Delco, there's Champion, there's Platinum. You can go on down the list. This cross-section tells me that with a great ignition system, with a brand new plug and brand new engine, it just doesn't make a difference.
It's almost nothing as far as out-of-the-box spark plugs go.
On power.
Yeah.
But we think there are other reasons to choose some of these plugs, like the Platinum and the Iridium and things like that.
Longevity, yeah.
But then there's the very last thing, which is what we actually learned. Steve has called up our proof about spark plug gap that we saw with the Autolite plugs. In the black lines here, we've got 45 thousandths gap. In the red, 65 thousandths. And over and over and over, it repeats so that we believe the trend is that the bigger gap made a little bit more power, as you can see.
Yeah, I was a non-believer initially. I was like, oh, that's not gonna matter. Once it started the flame, it's taken over. But it did it again.
Yeah.
And we didn't believe it, so went back and did it with another set of spark plugs, and it did it again.
So watch this with the NGK Racing plug. The last thing we tested is opening up the gap to 60 thousandths on our NGK Racing plug, and that saw 806.9 horsepower and 609.7 pound-feet. Black lines here are gonna be the NGK plug right out of the box, and then in the red lines, we open it up to 60 thousandths, and you can see it's definitely trending better all the way up to, I'm gonna call it 5,800 RPM, and then once again, all the way up at the top.
Little peak right there. I have to admit, I was a real naysayer. This gap thing kind of doing A-B, the way we should test things.
Yeah.
If there's something going on, I'm heading the other direction towards big versus small.
It's definitely a trend you can see. I mean, it's not huge, but it's there. There is something there.
Well, once again, what we see all the time is that it's just that little stuff that ends up adding up, and next thing you know, you're making 20 more horsepower than the next guy. And more horsepower than the next guy is what we strive for every single time on Engine Masters.
You know what? Maybe I should go 65.
No?
I don't know.
David? I think I am going to go 65.
Steve's made the executive decision to go 65 thousandths, probably because he bent one too big and didn't want to tap it back. That'd be my guess.
Probably.
I don't know. Let's go big or go home. I mean, widen out the gap.
Yep, but I would have gapped it at the sharp point instead of at the dull point.
Really?
I feel like my entire discussion's the dull point.
Really?
What happens if I make the exhaust header this much longer or that much shorter? Brace yourself to be enlightened this time on Engine Masters. This time we're gonna study how the length of the primary tubes on your exhaust header can affect the shape of the power curve. It's super interesting and very scientific. You know that because once again, I've got the whiteboard and everything. All right, before we get started, let me tell you about my artwork here. This is gonna be a cutaway of one cylinder. This is the piston, it's inside the cylinder. Here's your combustion chamber, spark plug. Let's call this your intake valve in blue and your exhaust valve in red. Here's the interesting thing. There are 5 different ways that those exhaust gases are aided in getting out of the cylinder. Here they are. There's pop or blowdown, there's inertia, there's there's inlet airflow, there's the piston motion, and finally, the pressure wave, which is what we're really gonna be talking about here. Let me go through each one of these. Let's assume that we are in our exhaust stroke right now. There's a bunch of exhaust gas here inside the chamber. The first thing that's gonna happen is the pop. See, there's a high pressure area here in the chamber, and when the valve opens, which I will depict by erasing this little bit of the chamber, when the valve opens, that high pressure inside meets the low pressure in the pipe, and poof, it literally blows that high pressure fumes out the exhaust pipe. So that's the pop, also called blowdown. Next, we have inertia. I've drawn the exhaust in sort of black specks because remember that an exhaust gas is actually particulate. There's stuff in there. So as it moves out here, remember that an object in motion wants to stay in motion. So you've got the inertia of that stuff working its way out, and that helps it keep moving. Then we've got inlet airflow. Remember that as we are moving up on the exhaust stroke, that the intake valve is gonna open before the piston hits top dead center. In the engine we're looking at here, let's just say it's opening when the piston's moving up, but it is 40 crankshaft degrees before it's all the way at the top of the exhaust stroke. So now that the intake valve is open, we have the inlet, gases, which would be an air-fuel mixture, moving in through the inlet port and into the chamber. And I'm gonna talk a little bit later about how those are actually under a little bit of pressure, a higher pressure than what we're seeing inside the chamber at the point where the piston's that high in the cylinder. And so as that fresh air is flowing in, it is also pushing exhaust gases out. So that's how inlet flow works. Now, the thing that might surprise you to hear is that the piston moving up on the exhaust stroke is actually the least effective method of getting exhaust gases out of the cylinder. When we learn suck, squeeze, bang, blow, we know that this piston's moving upward, and it seems obvious that as it does that, it's shoving exhaust out. And it does, but it's the least effective method. Finally, there is the pressure wave, which ties in clearly to the pop. Pressure wave is when the exhaust valve opens and you get that initial burst of pressure. It creates a pressure wave inside the pipe. And as that pressure wave exits the pipe right here, there's actually a reflected wave or refractory wave that moves back the other direction. And what that actually is a negative pressure area. So you got pressure on the way back, it gets reflected into negative pressure back here, and because that pressure is then lower in the exhaust port right here, it helps that inlet airflow to keep on going and pull the rest of the exhaust fumes out the exhaust pipe. Wow, that's a lot. And here's what makes that even more interesting is that whole pressure wave deal is not just affecting the exhaust and the evacuation, but it's also critical to the intake side of the engine. Here's why. Remember that the camshaft is in what we call overlap. That means that at the top of the exhaust stroke, the intake valve is open and the exhaust valve is open. And so what that means is not only is this pressure wave drawing exhaust out, it's also drawing that intake charge in, which does two things. It clears the cylinder of all those exhaust gases, and it fills it with all that precious air and fuel that later on is gonna make big power. And the thing is, all of this is affected by how long the header primary tube is. Remember we talked about that pressure wave traveling down here. Well, let's just assume it's at a fixed speed. Call it the speed of sound. It's on its way down here and the negative one's on its way back, but when you make this tube much longer, you can see it's got a longer path to get back to the cylinder. It's all about getting this tube the right length to time that pressure wave so that it's doing exactly what you want it to as far as clearing the cylinder and bringing in the inlet charge. Now, why would both of those things be super important? Well, one, you don't want the exhaust in here because exhaust doesn't burn, so it's gonna hurt power. And if exhaust is trapped in there, it's gonna give you a pumping loss, either as the piston tries to push it out or as it's trapped in the cylinder and it's trying to be compressed. The other thing that you want is the timing on the intake valve to be perfect with the wavelength tuning that you probably have idealized in your intake manifold. Probably not, but that is the theory. So everything that we're gonna be looking at in this episode is about that pressure wave inside the pipe, how long it can be, how short it can be, and the effect on power. I'll tell you what it's going to do. The supercharging effect of that pressure wave can be tuned to happen at a particular point in the RPM range. That's where you will see torque multiplied the most. Therefore, you can tune where you want the fattest torque by adjusting that. Now, it's gonna be different for every single engine. The optimum length is gonna be affected by the cam timing, the engine displacement, the chamber size. I mean, there's a million different things. One of the most critical ones is going to be the exhaust primary tube diameter. The larger the tube, the slower those gases are moving. It's gonna affect things a lot differently than with a smaller tube, and don't worry about that for this episode. We know that the 2¼ inch tube on our big block Chevy in practical testing has shown to be the right thing. So length is gonna be the one variable that we're gonna change. You might also ask what's going on with like the header collector and the collector extension. Those are variables that we're also going to leave alone. The actual engine that we are going to test, it's a 478 cubic inch big block Chevy, but the fact of the matter is you can't take the data from this episode and say, hey, I really liked how their engine ran with a 40-inch primary tube, so that's what I'm gonna run in my engine. It's going to be different for every engine, every displacement, every camshaft, every cylinder head, and especially every intake design. Really, you have to look at this as a big package. So I'm not telling you what to do as much as we will collectively be giving you some stuff to think about that you might not have seen before. Now, there's one more thing about exhaust header design that I want to sort of bench race with the Steves, and then finally, we're going to fire it up with some really long tubes on it and start to shorten them in the hunt for power. All right, guys, I love this test, but I have to address the elephant in the room, which I know every single audience member is gonna like hit me on the internet and go, this is invalid because they're not equal length headers. Our longest tube here is 54 inches. We measured the shortest one at like, I forget, 42 or 45. Yeah. Wild difference.
45.
Discuss.
Show me a set that is equal length.
Zoomies.
Okay, there's one.
Yeah.
Now name a collected header that's equal length.
That's definitely the thing. And when I was a magazine editor, I'm sure you got this, I would all the time, they'll say, oh, well, that's an invalid test because the header tubes have to be an equal length. And so you can't package that in a passenger car, just no way.
Right.
And the other thing is the inlet runner an equal length on every hole?
No.
No, so therefore, would you want the header length to be equal on every hole?
Yeah, and also the pulse firing is not equal distance. It's 270, 90, 180, 180 on each bank.
Right.
I remember small block Ford guys doing different diameters for different cylinders because the runners were different lengths and just going way off the deep end. These are as good as they get. I've tested this set of dyno headers against a lot of different stuff.
They're really
pretty darn good.
Yeah. Better than chassis headers. So for all those reasons, equal length headers for the typical kind of car that we deal with is completely impractical. That being said, we're now gonna test massive lengths of tubing. That is the longest primary tube I've ever tested.
You know, it's interesting. I had no idea how much different it would sound.
Yeah.
I mean,
we've warmed it up. It sounds weird.
It sounds like a drift car.
Is that good or bad?
Depends on who you ask. I'll be.
Do you mean it sounds like it's on the rev limiter all the time?
That's non-committal, Steve-O.
That's exactly right. It's non-committal, Steve-O.
Okay. Yeah. So the first thing we're gonna do is run it here with these really long tubes. I measured the longest one at 54 inches, and it's gonna be interesting. We've already warmed it up and had a peek at what's gonna happen. Here comes the full story.
The real deal.
Yeah. Oh, I can't wait.
I really like this.
I know, me too.
It's gonna be so cool. Here's our power numbers with the really long tubes on the thing. This is a little weird to me. The peaks are 591.9 pound-feet of torque, and we're seeing 773.7 horsepower at 7,200 RPM. What's this all about?
You know, this thing has enough camshaft in it.
It's big.
It does not want to really run in any sort of happy state below about 4,500. So, I actually tried to pull it down to 4,000.
I heard that.
And it surged, and it just was not happy.
Didn't like it.
Probably be a little better with fuel injection, but it's what we've got. And the thing that I'm seeing more noticeable than anything in my mind is how flat and long the torque curve is.
Oh, there you go, yeah.
Yeah, and it climbed that out of that hole pretty
quickly.
determinedly, you know.
Yeah, it did, and then hung in there. This engine with the regular header is made as much as 610 on torque. I think we'll see that later in the show on peak, but I don't think it's making any of this sort of area right here.
I would almost guarantee it's not.
Yeah, exactly. I guess next step then is we're gonna make a big swing and go remove one whole section of tube out of this thing. I'll measure it up, tell you what that is, and then we'll make more power. Now we've reduced that primary tube length by 9 inches. The power is 787.3 horsepower at 7,200 RPM, and the peak torque is now happening at 6,100 RPM, and it's 604.4. The RPM at the peak numbers is raising a question to me, which is, often we do things and the RPM stays the same and maybe the power tilts around it and everything. We're actually gonna see the RPM at peak torque change, aren't we? Based on tube length.
I think so. I think what happens is it starts to change volumetric efficiency, which is cylinder filling. And so the torque's gonna go up when it's filled better. So this is all gonna change the wave tuning, whether it be intake runner length or header length. And those things, I think, they're gonna change the RPM because it's gonna happen at a different speed or a different tuning wave.
Absolutely. The question is, will the longer headers be so efficient at lower RPM that the number is higher than that? So let's find out.
It's lower.
You think it's lower?
Which number are you talking about? The RPM number or the power?
Peak.
The
torque number.
Yeah. Is the torque? Yes.
Yeah.
There's the answer. So here, the wavelength tuning of the longer tube shows us that it's making more meat down here below 5,500 RPM and even a higher number. Right?
No, I don't think
No, it's not a higher
number.
number. It's just that the slope has changed.
Yeah, it went 594 there versus 604. It's pretty darn close as far as output, though, at a radically different RPM range.
If you look at the black line, which is the shorter tube, it's still got a big, long, flat torque curve, but look how it's even better with the longer tube on our first test.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So really, what we're seeing is below 5,500, the longer tubes are happier, but they're completely giving up power.
It's a huge difference down here. It's a smaller difference up here, still relevant, but not as much. But down here, I think we were looking at something like in torque, what are a couple points here from?
Yeah, let's say at 4,700 RPM, we went from 446 to 491.
Yeah, that's a chunk.
That's a big old chunk of change. The question is, who cares, right?
Anybody driving it at 4,500 or 5,000?
But they're not. No. Especially not with an engine like this. I think a lot of people will look at a curve like this and go, oh, well, I cruise the freeway at 2,000 RPM and roll into it. I want that torque down there. But that's not how you're driving this thing.
Well, not this particular engine,
right?
Especially. This is a race engine, basically.
Yeah.
So.
But I guess it's true if you had a dump truck. We would have to scale the whole test down to like, 454 with 8-to-1 compression and a small camshaft. Yeah. But the longer tube, I think, is going to
favor low RPM.
It is. It's going to favor low RPM. We just don't know how long is long because the engine combination is so different.
The other thing I would say is how low is low.
Yeah.
Because I have seen very short intake runners and very short headers actually be horrible at 3,500 and better than a long tube at 1,500. It changes where it happens, and it will move up and down as the waves pass through.
There's a lot of interdependent variables, cam timing.
Tons.
Absolutely.
Intake and exhaust track lengths and tuning effect there.
Yeah,
so.
But in my stand-up, I explained to the audience, this isn't like follow our lead and make the tubes this long. It is know that this affects things.
Yes.
Yeah. What I need to know is how much it's going to affect it when we go even shorter. So what's the plan? Are we going to like put the collector right back on? Or are we going to go with like a...
I think we've got a 4-inch piece we can get in there.
So we're going to go take another 5 inches out of it, right?
Yes.
All right, here goes. Now we have the longest tube set at 40 inches, the shortest that we've seen yet. The power numbers are 789.4 horsepower at 7,300 RPM, and the torque is 605 pound-feet at 6,400. Let's look at the overlay. It's the only way I know how to discuss this. Red lines here are at 45, and the black lines are at 40, and I think what we just learned that somehow it was in a sweet spot at 45 because the shorter ones made a lot less torque and didn't really improve the horsepower except for that wiggle right there.
It's kind of tilting the curve on the last change, and this one it just made more from 6,000 and below and about the same from 6,000 up.
Yeah.
As hard as it is for me to say, it looked like it liked the longer pipes better. That's the better curve.
I would say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I would also say that in past testing with this engine, it's made more power overall. So is that much tubing actually killing, you know,
That much bottom end?
20 horsepower and 5 or 10 pound-feet?
Well, one way to find out.
Yeah. So that's a really curious trend. We're not really going to know the answer until we get rid of that. And I think we're going to do that by actually changing headers. We have another set that's identical to these.
Absolutely identical from Schoenfeld.
Yeah, so we're going to go change the whole header now. And our out-of-the-box header, which, by the way, is 4 inches shorter than the previous test that we made, and we're seeing 801.3 horsepower and 607.4 pound-feet of torque. The layover, Mr. Brulé. Here we go, 40 inches versus 36 inches. We got 40 in red, 36 in black, and I think we're seeing what we expect up there with more peak horsepower at higher RPM with a shorter header and less torque down low, except for here.
Yeah.
This is like some wave going.
This is what we were talking about earlier, where something shorter can actually be better down at a lower engine speed. You know, it's not always one trend that leads in one direction.
And I guess that's because the pressure wave, it's going down and coming back at different rates depending on what we do.
Absolutely.
It's ending at a different point and causing a different level of pressure drop at the exhaust valve.
You also have first order and second order reflected wave. So it can actually go up and down the pipe twice.
Okay.
At times, and maybe catch the
first one in the right place.
The beginning of the overlap event and maybe tag the back end of it. So.
It is traveling at the speed of sound.
Yeah.
Literally. So yeah, who knows what's happening in there.
And it's the system. It's not any one piece that makes everything work. There's no magic math, or they would have already designed the perfect engine once. So there is a lot of testing involved, and that's exactly what we're seeing here, is just there's not always one answer to the whole question.
Well, to give ourselves more questions, let's go ahead and overlay every link that we've done so we can just see the whole picture. Our conclusion on those last two steps, though, were 36 inches, better top-end power, and better bottom, 4,500 RPM power versus the 40, and now we're looking at this entire mess. Let's talk you through it. The longest ones here are in green at 54 inches. The next length that we tested was 45, that's in blue. Then we went to 40 inches in red and 36 in black. And man, I think that the most standout thing I'm seeing here is that really, really long header makes massive low-end torque and then...
At least at 4,800 RPM it does.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, you're right, and then it dips down over here again. Okay, to conclude, I think it's all about what we often say is tendencies. We never say, well, we rarely say fact. We say that long tubes tend to favor bottom end torque. That seems to absolutely be true here. We say that shorter tubes tend to favor high RPM horsepower. We definitely saw that as well. And the bottom line is, you're gonna run the header that bolts to your car, let's be honest, right? But you know what, someday we could test a lot of passenger car headers and see what the best one is. Yeah, maybe we'll do that on a future episode of Engine Masters.
Hello, xin chào tất cả các bạn nhé. Lại là mình đây. Ra những video ok lá cho các bạn xem. Các bạn đây, các bạn thấy hay thì hãy like và comment giúp kênh của mình thật hay nhé. Cảm ơn các bạn đã theo dõi kênh của mình. Thank you các bạn rất nhiều nha. Ok luôn các bạn ơi. Các bạn ơi. Ôi thằng này mình chưa làm xong rồi. Sao rồi? Tí lấy cái máy. Hả? Tí bật cho cái máy đấy quay. Quay để mình quen em. Không quay gieo ở đây. Thế bao giờ đi nhỉ? Máy này quay quen máy đấy quay gieo. Cái 6 rưỡi một cái 6 giờ mà. vào đâu. Tập mới cái thứ tư tập kia mở, tập kia là mở. Tập này thì tập này mở. Thứ tư để cái tập ấy cho nó lên. Tập kia tí em xóa đi để trông lại lúc cái tập mới. Tối nay nó chặn lúc 3 giờ làm tập đó lên.
Với lên siêu luôn.
Nó mở nó để. Đánh lên máy coi. chào và hẹn gặp lại các bạn nhé. Mình xin kết thúc video tại đây. Cảm ơn các bạn đã theo dõi video.